Okay, well, let's get on to the topic of the Great Thinkers series, which is really why we're doing this conversation, to talk a bit about that and just to raise awareness of the series and talk a bit about our contributions to it. My contribution, I guess, we'll get to a little later, and you've got actually, as we'll discover, three volumes in the series. We'll talk a bit about each of those. Let's talk about the series more generally. So the Great Thinkers series, published by P&R, Presbyterian and Reformed. And the basic idea behind the series, in case our listeners or viewers don't know, is short, concise, but academically informed and biblically and theologically orthodox introductions to major thinkers, great thinkers, not necessarily in the sense of being very impressive in their philosophy itself, although in some cases that is true, but perhaps in the sense of having an impact, influential thinkers, mainly in Western philosophy and thought, but not exclusively so, as I think we'll discover later in the series. And already there are volumes published on Thomas Aquinas, on Karl Marx, Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault, your contributions, we'll get to those in a moment, Hegel, Richard Dawkins, interesting inclusion in the series there, Ransom Poythress writing that volume, and David Hume, the one that I've contributed. And there are several more in the work. So it's a very exciting series and quite a breadth of content, quite a diversity of thinkers. But the idea is to provide, as I say, theologically orthodox expositions and critiques of each thinker. So let me put this question to you, Chris. Why does this series matter? Why is it a good thing?
I think there are two things that this series is doing for me that made it a compelling choice for me to write in. The first, and this is gold dust for someone working in my area, is that it's treating thinkers one by one. So we're not, from my point of view as a scholar of postmodernism, we're not trying to lump all the mid-20th century French thinkers into one bucket and call it postmodernism and then try to say intelligent things about them, which is extremely hard to do with any level of rigor. We're able to take, for example, Derrida or Foucault in their own terms, not trying immediately to fit them into some bigger picture, but let them set things out as they want to set things out. And I jumped at the chance to do books like that. The second thing that I actually really enjoyed writing in this way, and hopefully it helps the reader as well, is the way in which these great series books are divided into two really quite distinct halves. And the first half of each book is really just letting the great thinker speak in their own voice. So not coming in with a biblical assessment or critique, but just saying, okay, what does Derrida, or what does Foucault, or what does Hume, what do they say? How do they see the world? What categories do they use? And just allowing them to in a sense, set their own table and invite us to their feast. And I think, certainly for the thinkers that I study, that's so important for groups such as Reformed and Evangelical Christians who would perhaps have an antipathy to this sort of thinking, to be able to just come to it and see, first of all, before we get into how to respond to it, what do they actually say? So I love that about this series. And then, of course, the second half is an engagement, a biblical, theological engagement with these thinkers, which I think is also incredibly important for Reformed Christians to be able to slow down and think through what a biblical or a Reformed response to an engagement with these thinkers might look like. And this series provides the opportunity to do that. So those are my two reasons why I jumped at the chance to write these books. But I'd be interested, James, to flip the question to you and say, what is it about the series that you really like?
Yeah, well, you've actually covered some of the ground that I would have mentioned. I really like the format as well, and I don't think that there's anything on the market that really is doing the same thing, namely providing very accessible introductions to these major thinkers. But in the first half of the book, as you say, listening to what they're saying, saying, you know, let's not jump in. Let's listen to them on their own terms. Let's try to understand what they're saying, where they're coming from, a little bit of their historical and philosophical context, and then once we have some confidence that we know where they're coming from and what they're talking about, then we can respond. Then we can bring our own Reformed Christian convictions and just a general rational evaluation to bear on their thoughts. So you've got the format where you try to understand the thinker and then do a critique, but also the theological ethos of the series I think is quite unique as well. I mean, there are plenty of Christian assessments out there of these thinkers. Some of them are evangelical in orientation, but as you and I think agree that the Reformed tradition has some distinctive critical tools to bear on analyzing these thinkers, and so I think that makes a valuable contribution. And why do I think people in general should be interested in the series? I just think it's useful to know about these thinkers. It's part of a good education, a good rounded education, whatever you do in life, whatever you're involved in church ministry. It's just useful to understand some of these thinkers because they've had an impact. They've had an impact on the way people see the world, on academia, on politics, on culture, and we are all swimming in the river that they are upstream from, and they've contributed to. So just for the sake of cultural awareness and having a good rounded education, I think these are going to be important tools. So I'm excited to be able to contribute something to the series as well.